All right, hello everyone, and welcome to the ultimate guide to creating a successful security awareness program. My name is Alex Smith. I'm the marketing coordinator with the Security Awareness Company, which has been around since the beginning of the 90s. We were founded by Win Schwartau, who you may or may not have heard of. He's been a key player in the security industry for better part of 3 decades. And during all this experience in the InfoSec and training industries, we've maintained our place on the leading edge of emerging tech and training theories. And one of the key players in our company is Kayley Melton. She is the Chief Digital Officer here at the Security Awareness Company, and she will be walking all of you through this webinar today. It should be about a half hour. And if you have any questions or comments, feel free to leave those in the chat, and we will do our best to address those before the half hour is up. So with that, I will turn it over to Kayley, and I hope you all enjoy.
Hi guys, hope you guys are having a good afternoon. In today's webinar, my goal is to take you guys through each of these topics, and with the purpose of coming out the other side with a solid foundation for your own security awareness program. So let's dive into it. So obviously, security awareness training matters, but I have a good story to illustrate this. So picture it. It's a mere 2 days away from Election Day in France, and reports of a massive hack have just begun to circulate. 9 gigabytes of stolen campaign emails and documents belonging to Emmanuel Macron, the popular candidate, have just been made public. They are immediately suspected for containing scandalous materials. It's an obvious recipe for disaster, right? Well, let's rewind. Macron and his strategists began to receive high-quality spear phishing emails that led to this hack months earlier. They were very hard to spot amongst their regular flow of internal communications. But Macron's team knew they would be targets, so they prepared. They took the time to learn about what to look for and how to respond when they received anything fishy. But that's not all. As an added layer of security, they also employed some deception of their own against the attackers. They set up several fake email accounts and flooded them with fake documents and conversations. It became nearly impossible to parse what was real from what was fake. And by the time this collection of information was released, it was honestly more mundane than scandalous. And then 2 days later, he won. So why does security awareness matter? I would say that not only does it prepare your front line of defense against harmful attacks, it also helps them to know how to respond when those attacks happen. President Macron and his team prevented the cybercriminals from derailing their campaign during one of the most sensitive time periods of a potential president's career. There's no way it would have been successful if everyone involved weren't engaged with their training and on board with the strategy. So, we also know security incidents happen, but how do they happen? So passwords are still the guardians of our digital universe, whether security professionals like it or not. More advanced authentication methods like biometrics are on the rise, but the classic username-password combo is still our default and what we're used to. Passwords are mostly okay-ish. The real problem comes when authentication processes are misused. Basically, bad things happen. The Equifax data breach was so massive that it can already be considered a historical event. If you're unfamiliar, this impacted nearly 1 in every 2 Americans. When a cybersecurity forensics team began to investigate the causes of this breach, it was revealed that an important online portal was being protected by a really clever user track of their passwords, or forcing password changes only when it's absolutely necessary can really make a difference. The basic idea is that the easier it is for your users to comply, the harder it will be for users to make poor choices. The other big catalyst for incidents is, of course, phishing. This is probably not news. Did you know that researchers have found that, on average, 96% of users did not click on simulated phishing campaigns? Probably not what you expected me to say. But I mean, that's a pretty solid number, right? 96%, that's almost 100. It certainly doesn't seem to make for a convincing argument about why phishing training is needed in the first place. But the thing is, we've already established that all it takes is one click to compromise your organization. So with that in mind, we can refocus on the fact that 4% of users, or 4 of every 100 employees, did click on a phishing link. If it only takes a single click and users are receiving dozens of real phishing emails throughout their career, does this change your initial view of that statistic? So again, it all comes down to, how do we avoid epic failures? Many experts will suggest implementing technical safeguards that eliminate phishing emails before they even reach the end user. I mean, this would be a dream, right? It's a great first step, but the problem is it's just not enough. In fact, nothing in this space is 100% accurate at the moment. Something is always going to get through. So to bring it back full circle, the best way to prevent successful phishing attacks is always going to come back to quality training. You want to phish your users with simulated emails and follow up any clickers with remedial training. This is by far the best tool to educate and experience real-world attacks, which in turn is the best way to learn. It's also important to provide reinforcements to those same simulations, no matter what your click rate is for it. And you want that content to be engaging and thoughtful so that it will help your users better understand the consequences of a click. And that's both personally and professionally. Because if you help them care about it, they will care about it more. So basically, remember, with preparation and education, your organization could be a success story headline like Macron's team, instead of a national embarrassment like Equifax. So you may have inferred from the last section that it seems to all come down to this insider threat. The fact is, human beings really are the common flaw that exists at the core of every organization. If 97% of employees have access to some form of sensitive information, your risk surface is massive. This sentiment is at the heart of the security awareness meme that you will hear often in this industry. Your employees are your weakest link. And it is true that insider threats are one of the most common pain points in an organization's defense, and the bad guys will absolutely exploit this, and they do. So let's look at a few types of insider threats. First of all, we have the malicious insider threat. A malicious insider is an employee that intentionally destroys or steals data from their company. Basically, this is an employee who takes actions themselves that have a major negative impact. If you've ever seen the series Mr. Robot, the protagonist, a skilled hacker, finds himself in this position as he's recruited for an underground hacktivist group to take down the mega corporation where he works. I highly recommend it. It's one of the few mostly decent modern examples of how hacking works, in my opinion, and thus could give you great insight into malicious insiders, in addition to its entertainment value, of course. So the accidental insider is an employee whose mistakes lead to negative impacts on their company. So instead of doing these things maliciously or with intent, it's purely an accident. A phish clicker would likely fall under this category. You know, they see an enticing email and they click something malicious with complete ignorance on their part. Same result, but not intentional. The third type is the negligent insider, and it's fair to count both accidental and negligent insider threats as two sides of the same coin. But I do feel there is a subtle difference. Negligent insiders are employees who do intentionally bypass security controls, which ends up causing something negative to happen, but they're not necessarily doing it with a malicious intent. For example, a my password is password user, or someone who reuses the same password across several accounts would both qualify as negligent. They're probably aware it's not right, but it's just so convenient. So again, how do we avoid epic failure when it seems like failure is unavoidable? I'll give you a big hint. Education and policy are always going to be involved in this equation. You'll hear it a lot in this webinar, so sorry to repeat it, but it bears repeating. In addition to this, there's 3 more steps to reduce the risk of an insider threat. Performing risk assessments will help you identify the most valuable assets of your organization and allow you to develop a solid strategy to protect them. It also gives you metrics to track over time to prove that your efforts are actually paying off in the long run. Management particularly likes this step of the process. Developing an incident response plan puts a set of protocols into place for dealing with the inevitable security incident. Having workflows and actions in place ahead of time will greatly increase the likelihood of catching those incidents before they become massive breaches and cause for public shaming. And finally, you'll want to routinely audit access privileges for all employees. Each person should only have the level of access necessary for them to do their job, nothing more than that. And because job functions can evolve quickly, it's wise to review these from time to time. So, now that we know a little more about the insiders, let's learn about the enemy. As with any discussion of enemies, there's an appropriate quote from Sun Tzu. If you know the enemy and you know yourself, you need not fear the result of 100 battles. This basically means that in order to truly protect anything, you must first know what you're protecting it from. So if I asked you for your first guess about who or what is most likely to attack your organization from the outside, it would probably be hackers, right? But what is a hacker really? The term hacker tends to bring up this collective vision of a guy in a dark room with a creepy smile, wearing a sweater with the hood up and sunglasses because apparently it just wasn't dark enough. He might be hammering his keyboard and sending out scripts that look like lime green matrix code or ASCII skulls. This is not exactly reality. This tweet from an actual hacker contains one of the better definitions of hacker that I've seen to this day, and it came from a cheesy 1999 guidebook for tweens on internet slang. In truth, hacker has always been a generic umbrella term for all flavors of technically and mechanically advanced people. Hackers tend to appreciate open source and a solid proof of concept, but other than that, like all other humans, they exist on an ethical continuum. All of this to say, it is not correct to simply say that hackers are your enemy. Criminal hackers are your enemy. And by the way, the good guys in this fight are really awesome to have on your side. So again, this is an area where it's vital that your organization perform risk assessments. Do you know what cyber criminals would actually want from your organization right now? Is it PII, trade secrets, banking information, medical records? Where and how is all of that stored? Who has access to it? The answer to these questions gives you invaluable insight into how to prepare for attacks and for how users should be trained to respond to and detect those threats. As easy as it would be to simply say insiders are your greatest threat and go after it that way, the truth is that 75% of breaches are still perpetrated by outsiders. So, if criminal hackers are your enemy, social engineering is their choice weapon of mass destruction. This is especially true when it comes to breaking through those first human layers of defense, your end users. The most widely used method for this is spear phishing, which requires extensive research on the criminal's part. The goal is to mimic the target's internal communications so convincingly that they click or send sensitive info without even asking. This is exactly what happened to Macron and his team, or what was attempted. It is much more difficult to spot a well-crafted spear phish than generic phishing, which makes it even more important to train users to be on the lookout for those suspicious red flags in emails or phone calls. So let's bring it all together and figure out how to build the world's strongest security awareness program. I encourage you to experiment with turning that meme from earlier, employees are your weakest link, into empowerment instead. What if employees were your strongest link? Would you say that President Macron's campaign team was made of weak links or strong links? And how do we create this culture of security strength? Well, luckily for you, we've come to the too long didn't read takeaways on how to create a successful awareness program that envisions employees as your strongest links. I've talked extensively today about why risk assessment should be mandatory, but I recognize that it can be an intimidating topic. If you're looking for a place to start, many security experts believe that the NIST, that's N-I-S-T, cybersecurity framework will eventually be the standard. I highly suggest reading up on it if you're unfamiliar. Second, listen to your employees. I know this seems overly simplified and catchphrasy, but I'm telling you, if you want your program to evolve and quickly gain acceptance within your internal culture, you have to listen to the people directly involved in it. Your employees are the only ones who will be able to tell you what works, what doesn't, and where they want or need more information. It is also absolutely essential that your training program adhere to what's called a model of continuous learning. This basically means that your program should introduce new information in a variety of formats and situations to the same users consistently over time, rather than administering the same boring 1-hour learning module that's pushed out to them year after year. I mean, if it gets to the point where your users know the answers to the assessment at the end of their 1-hour learning module, you've got a problem. The digital landscape changes from day to day now, and your training must be adaptable to that. Making your education flexible enough to deal with a continuously changing attack surface means that your users will be able to as well. The importance of reporting incidents and setting up a process that empowers the user to do this as quickly as possible cannot be overstated. In a nutshell, admittedly a very simplified nutshell, reporting can equal prevention. At the very least, it will help decrease your detection and reaction times to any incoming threats or attacks, which is obviously a huge advantage. And here's a newsflash for you. Your employees do not want to sit through training. The only way to cut through that resistance is to make the content in front of them interesting and personally relatable. If you can inspire their curiosity, you've really done your job right. In fact, our credo here at the Security Awareness Company is to make educational content personal, engaging, and interesting. Everything we make and have ever made has always been made with the end user in mind. President Macron's campaign success story can be your own. Users are often maligned in the InfoSec industry, but they're your greatest asset. Increasing their understanding and awareness of the threats they and others pose, as well as the consequences of a breach, will greatly improve your overall chances of building that resilient organization that makes headlines for the right reasons. And with that, I have come to the end.
That was great, Kayley. Thank you so much. Again, this is Alex. I'm the marketing coordinator at the Security Awareness Company, and I wanted to let you guys know if you have any questions, comments, concerns, you can reach out to us directly. There is an email right there, and you can also reach out to Kayley with the address Kayley at thesecurityawarenesscompany.com, and my own email is Alex, A-L-E-X, at thesecurityawarenesscompany.com. We will be sending out a detailed white paper in the next few days. It'll go more in depth from the topics that we discussed today. That will be titled, surprisingly, The Ultimate Guide to Creating a Successful Security Awareness Program. And I did want to note that on our website, which again is thesecurityawarenesscompany.com, there are a lot of resources at your disposal. For example, our blog features weekly content that applies to cybersecurity related topics. Last week we discussed potential career paths in the field. This week we have a piece on disaster recovery. You can find those and more, several other things really at thesecurityawarenesscompany.com. So thank you so much for joining us today, and please do not hesitate to reach out. If everybody could give a virtual hand to Kayley for the great job she did with this presentation, that would be great. We hope you have an excellent rest of your afternoon.
Thanks, everybody.